All Roads Lead to Rome, Part 15b, from fivedoves.com, by Pastor Bob Reed. Quote, while inquiring minds might want to know why the USA is the policeman of the world, it's not because we want to protect the weak and helpless. Rather, it is about enforcing the will of the Vatican as the Vatican's enforcers. I know this is all hard to comprehend and somewhat overwhelming to say the least, but it is all true. Have you ever seen the emblem of Interpol? It's the emblem of a world globe with a sword through it. The Secretary of the Treasury is not an officer of the United States. It is, of course, prohibited for U.S. officers to act as agents for foreign principals under U.S. Code 219, under 18 Code U.S. 219. Also, of course, U.S. officers cannot hold office until they take an oath of office that they will bear true faith and allegiance to support the U.S. Constitution of the United States. No record can be found of any such administering the oath of office to Secretaries of the Treasury over the past 20 years. None whatsoever. To recap what I have shared so far, you and I, and every American citizen, is the property of a subsidiary of the International Monetary Fund. The Secretary of the Treasury administers IMF property. The Secretary of the Treasury has allegiances to foreign powers and takes his orders from them, not from the citizens of the USA. The Secretary of the Treasury controls federal persons by absolute powers that are already pre-approved by Congress. No man within his powers may legally buy or sell without his permission. If you have a Social Security number card, you have a permanent irrevocable status as a federal person. Sounds like we already have the mark of the beast. How long do you think it will be before they require it to be applied to your right hand or forehead? Forthcoming in the relatively very near future is a national ID card known as Real ID. Included in page 650 of Public Law 104-208, Part B, Title 4, in with other defense appropriation legislation, as if you were the enemy, requires a national identification card. No one will be able to get a job without one. This is true for the first time in history. Your government must pre-authorize private employment contracts. The program will be administered by the same non-existent U.S. Department of Treasury. This will be encoded on your state driver's license, or for those who don't drive, a separate ID card. The date for the Real ID has been extended several times due to states dragging their feet or offering up reasons for delay implementation. Without the Real ID, you will not be able to fly, enter federal buildings, and a few other details. According to the Department of Homeland Security, full implementation was to begin earlier this year. 41 states and the District of Columbia have already adopted Real ID, and 21 states are fully compliant as I write. When former DHS Director Janet Napolitano, herself a Jesuit-trained temporal coadjutor from Jesuit Santa Clara University, extended the deadline to December 1st, 2014, it was said to be the last delay. The truth of the Real ID is that it is a real nightmare. You and your labor and all your children or future children have been sold. You are a commercial merchandise, and your children have been sold. The GATT trade treaty requires SSNs at birth after November 30th, 1996. I had to look it up for sure because I used to work on the side for H&R Block preparing income tax returns during the tax season. According to a Social Security Administration pamphlet, which contradicts the GATT trade treaty dated February 1999, which says obtaining a Social Security number was strictly voluntary. Not so. GATT is a treaty that is with an international political monster that grew out of the European Economic Community, EEC, or the Common Market. GATT stands for the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. The European Common Market was set up by the Vatican on March 25, 1957, which controls most of the world commerce. The 1991 Maastricht Agreement was signed by 12, now 15 European socialist nations. The agreement set up a regional parliament, tribunals, and limits the powers of member nations. The question, why does GATT require your children to have Social Security numbers at birth, remains unanswered, other than to institute a cradle-to-grave numerical identifying method discussed by Professor Carroll Quigley, former President Clinton's mentor at Georgetown University. Under Title 22 of the U.S. Code, there are requirements that require deposits to foreign banks. If you save past financial records prior to 1999 and you paid income taxes, look at the canceled check. You will find that the check's backside endorsement reads, "To the IMF trust account in Puerto Rico." Also reads, "Payment for debt obligations of the U.S." This is the equivalent of garnishment of your wages by the IRS for student loans or other federal debts. Your IRS payments do not run the government. They don't even go to Congress for them to decide which bills get paid and in what order. Your payments are levied, garnished directly to the bankruptcy receivers, just as you would expect in any bankruptcy. The tax payments first go to the state's unemployed funds bank account at the Federal Reserve Bank per Section 904 of the Social Security Act, then to the UN Bank for Reconstruction and Development, per 22 U.S. Code 286, created by the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1945. Then, exactly 1 year later, the deposited funds go to the IMF's Rothschild banks, where it is split between the UK Bank of England and the Vatican. The split of the funds is 40-60, or 40% to the UK Bank of England and 60% to the Vatican. Note particularly well this paragraph because it is not readily known to the people of this nation. There's been a major research project to dislodge this information. I discovered years ago that you can't simply ask anyone or any government agency to give you a straight answer to this. They obfuscate, evade, or further obscure the investigator from discovering the truth. Discovering the truth became even more of an issue of deceit when the Federal Reserve Bank permitted individual banks to stop returning customers their canceled checks. You now have to pay at most banks to request a canceled check, such as a tax payment to the IRS. Furthermore, navigating through the federal paperwork, trail, forms, agencies, all obfuscate and deter anyone from getting a straight answer. The Bretton Woods Agreement adopted the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. This means that all oil purchase was paid for in U.S. dollars. This meant that nations of the world had to keep on hand in reserve U.S. dollars to pay for their purchase of oil. The problem has been that the U.S. Federal Reserve has been cheating for years and began printing excess U.S. dollars. The implications of that are ominous for the USA and the U.S. economy, since there are several efforts underway at present to unhinge from the U.S. dollar. For example, Russia and China now trade in their own currencies, bypassing the U.S. dollar. There are other countries like the BRICS nations working on establishing their own equivalent to the IMF. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Since President Nixon took the USA off the gold standard in 1971, all paper currency is no longer backed by gold or silver, but rather backed by the full faith and credit of the USA. The bullion bank sitting adjacent to the entrance to Fort Knox, Kentucky, is a vault for sure. However, there isn't much in the way of gold stored there. Its impressive structure, barriers of fences, and appearance of military protection is all one gigantic con on the general public. Locals reported years ago on convoys of Army trucks coming and going at Fort Knox and traveling north up 31 West to Louisville, Kentucky, where their contents were loaded aboard the U.S. Railway postal cars, destined to be stored in New York's Federal Reserve Bank. The fact that our paper currency has underwent more than half-dozen design changes since 1913 again further reveals how the public have been robbed of their gold. The wording, statements, and specifics on U.S. paper currency initially stated redeemable in gold or silver. However, over the ensuing years, they were transformed gradually and subtly so that the masses of people were unaware of their being fleeced by their own government. The meaning of all this is that you and I became collateral for the debt through our labor and taxation. The fact is, the United Nations is involved in the assigning of Social Security numbers to newborns and all others as well. Parents of newborn babies today simply take for granted that the Social Security Administration has a working relationship with the 5,000 hospitals in America and see that your new baby gets his or her Social Security number through the hospital. Federal regulations deceptively refer to the UN as if it were New York City. To understand the legal definition of the term New York City as it is used in the Code of Federal Regulations, you must understand that the UN has its headquarters in New York City, on land originally donated to the UN by David Rockefeller. The land upon which the UN is physically located were the Rockefeller livestock yards that supplied the New York City area with fresh meat. Furthermore, United Nations law supersedes any federal, state, or local law within the headquarters district. This is based upon a federal law known as Title 22 U.S. Code Section 287D. The meaning of this apparently is that New York City is on UN land. Keeping in mind New York City is not a state and isn't even the capital of the state, notice how federal Social Security regulations refer to New York City, the headquarters of the UN, as a state. Title 20 Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 111, Subpart B, 422-103B2, 2. Birth registration document, SSA, may enter into agreement with officials of a state, including, for this purpose, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and New York City, to establish, as part of official birth registration process, a procedure to assist SSA in assigning Social Security numbers to newborn children, unquote. That says that the Social Security numbers, which have been assigned for 7 decades, but now the officials of the United Nations Headquarters District can establish a new procedure to assign Social Security numbers. Based upon the GATT Treaty, if you have a Social Security number, you are a commodity in foreign exchange or commerce. According to various legal educators' interpretation of the Social Security number system, we do not have the right to buy or sell. All domestic transactions are illegal. The Secretary of the Treasury, whose allegiance is to foreign powers, is already pre-approved to regulate your transactions. Your SSN comes from the same authority. Your new Real ID card will be issued by the same authority. The Roman Catholic Church has a legitimate claim on their property. By your own authority, signature on a permanent irrevocable record by your mother, you registered yourself into the system. This registration is somehow regulated by the UN headquarters. You possess a number of this authority. You cannot legally buy or sell without the permission of this authority. The GATT Treaty with the EEC requires SSNs at birth. The EEC was created by the Vatican. The national debt is owed to multinational banking cartels. These cartels were established by Roman Catholic crusaders. Your national debt cannot be paid off. Your future labor has been hypothecated as collateral for the national debt and has been seized. In my bibliography to this series, the reader has been offered an extremely comprehensive collection of books that I have owned and read over the course of 30 years. Many are accessible on the internet as PDF documents, free for the asking. Others are still in print and available for purchase. I repeat a statement I have made before, and that is, there is no better slave than the one who believes he is free. There is so much more that I could share with the reader, but I close out with this segment of the series. Anyone with half a brain can see that if we have been sold out by our leaders decades ago and subsequent politicians have merely gone along to get along, The likes of former Ohio Congressman James Traficant are rare, and rarely fully appreciated, even by those he served, both in his own district, in the Mahoning Valley of Youngstown, Ohio, and the true patriots and Christians throughout the land of the USA. P.S. If you have never viewed the movie The Matrix, rent it. Buy it. I bought the DVD at a yard sale for $1 some time back. I try to watch it about once every 3 or 4 months to study its subtleties. Everything I have shared in this series has been prophesied, history foretold, in our awesome Word of God, the King James Bible. God bless, and be not like those Hosea 4:6 referred to. Pastor Bob. Unquote. End of All Roads Lead to Rome, Part 15b. End of All Roads Lead to Rome.